Good evening. It's December 20th, 2013. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I'm happy to be hosting tonight's live webcast on LaRouchepack.com. We are, of course, joined by Mr. LaRouche tonight. I'm also joined by Jason Ross from the LaRouchePack scientific research team here in the studio with me. And we have prepared a series of questions, which will be the substance of tonight's dialogue with Mr. LaRouche. Now, I'm going to begin with a question that we've received from a institutional contact, which we're going to begin the proceedings of tonight's broadcast with. The question reads as follows. Mr. LaRouche, there have been some recent dramatic developments on the 9/11 case. This week, the U.S. Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York overturned a lower court ruling and reinstated the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Saudi High Commission as defendants on the grounds that the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the attacks trump the issue of sovereign immunity. The case has been remanded back to the federal district court. In addition, Representatives Walter Jones and Stephen Lynch have introduced a resolution into the House of Representatives demanding that President Obama declassify the 28-page chapter from the Joint Congressional Inquiry that documented foreign government support for the 9/11 terrorists. Senator Bob Graham, who chaired that joint inquiry, has called for the entire 9/11 investigation to be reopened based on new evidence showing even deeper Saudi complicity in the attacks. All of these developments have received extensive media coverage in the United States. What do you see as the implications of these developments and the significance of declassifying the 28 pages for U.S. policy in the Middle East? How can this impact on the fight against Salafi extremism, which is a common concern of many nations, including both Russia and China?
Well, in form, without some of the details which have to be resolved still, but in form, what's been happening, the whole 9/11 swindle has been turned upside down. It's over. Now, what was been suppressed by two presidents, Bush and Obama, have both obviously lied in terms of what they said and what they didn't say. They lied. And actually what had happened was that there was a cover-up by two presidents who voluntarily pushed the courts into suppressing the circulation of this information. Now the courts have acted to say they themselves have a different view, that this was guilt, it's guilt all the way through, but then the proceedings, which have to be taken now, mean that already, as of now, the information of the Saudi guilt in what they did in 9/11, the deaths in 9/11, which could have been uncovered at that time, immediately. They were guilty. But the point is, the implication is that the Saudi government actually organized, together with the British government itself, organized 9/11. And they organized it against the United States. So the point is that what the court has ruled is simply the court will no longer allow the concealment of the evidence on this matter, because the Saudi state acted unlawfully against the U.S. government. It has no right to seek protection from prosecution by the U.S. government and by the U.S. agencies and by the people whose families were killed and persecuted by this for all these years. So you just go back to the beginning of the young Bush administration, through Obama so far, through Obama's first term, and now he's into his second term. And these presidents have covered up mass murder against the United States and its people by the Saudi government. And with the complicity, which we know, with the complicity of the British government, the British Empire. So essentially the Saudis are part of the British Empire, and so this is the British Empire essentially, which is the guilty party here. The question is how the courts will treat this in process is now to be determined. But the evidence is that for the man on the street, whatever the lawyers come up with, for the man on the street, the Saudi Empire, together with the British Empire, connived to mass killing of American citizens. And that's what this amounts to. Now, with this proceedings through the legal process, in the court process, which now lifted, there's no longer a ban on this issue. The ban is lifted, and things are going to open up widely. And I think that both immediately the current president is obviously guilty. And now if he does not concede his guilt, I think the gate is immediately opened to throw him out of the presidency right now.
Well, Lynn, a question on another form of sovereign immunity, which is that claimed by Obama and the NSA to violate the law without being called to account. There was also some very important legal judicial decisions made this week regarding the NSA. The agency that would have made J. Edgar Hoover, the famous head of the FBI who tapped the phone of Dr. Martin Luther King, that would have made him green with envy had he lived to see them. This Monday, on the 16th, U.S. District Court Judge Richard Leon issued a judgment on a case that was challenging the NSA. In his ruling, the judge said that James Madison would have been aghast at what the NSA was doing. He said, and this is a quote, he said, "I cannot imagine a more indiscriminate and arbitrary invasion than this systematic and high-tech collection and retention of personal data on virtually every citizen for purposes of querying and analyzing it without judicial approval. Surely such a program infringes on that degree of privacy that the founders enshrined in the Fourth Amendment." He further said that the government had not revealed a single instance where that data collection had actually stopped an imminent attack or otherwise aided the government in achieving any objective that was time-sensitive in nature. In another major development, the White House appointed panel that was to review the NSA's programs, which was expected by most observers to propose cosmetic changes to the NSA, because of the climate, was forced to actually make real calls. The recommendations included an end to the NSA holding of bulk metadata, and that actual suspicion had to exist before collecting information. The panel also found that the bulk collection policies were not essential to preventing terrorist attacks, as emphasized by one member of that panel, Jeffrey Stone. They said that there has been no instance in which the NSA could say with confidence that the outcome of a terror investigation would have been any different without that program. And then, sort of in the on the humor department on this, today the German magazine Der Spiegel reported that among the targets of NSA and GCHQ, the British NSA, that among their targets, among the hotbeds of terrorism that they're investigating, have been UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, and Médecins du Monde, Doctors of the World, which provides health care in war-torn regions of the planet, which are obviously major targets for terrorism. So the question I'd like to ask you is, given the context of what you just discussed around Saudi Arabia and the 28 pages, what is the implication of what's occurring with this blowback on the NSA for Obama?
Well, the setup is that now there for throwing Obama out of office. That's what this amounts to. Because Obama is complicit in this operation. The previous Bush is also complicit as the devil. For example, they knew the fact of what the courts have responded to in the recent court hearing on this issue. There was no justification for concealing the evidence of what had happened in terms of 9/11. In other words, the entire cover-up of 9/11, which was decreed by two presidents, both presidents had committed really a fraud, or it's now being discussed as a fraud. But in point of fact, for any layman, any citizen of the United States who's got a brain still left in his head, both of them were guilty. Both were guilty as hell. Both Bush, young Bush, and Obama were both guilty of high crimes against the United States, as the courts have implicitly ruled that the people had the right to the information. It can no longer be suppressed. The next step is, do we go to the next step? And the next step is considering penalties and charges against the President of the United States, Bush, for having concealed the information, concealed the evidence, that this was a criminal action by the Saudi government against the United States. And as it was a criminal action, they had no right to protection. And both presidencies involved knew these facts, and therefore they implicitly lied or committed a fraud in another sense. And therefore what this has done is open the gates for the immediate impeachment of the current president, Obama. And I don't know how that can be avoided. Obama has resorted to terrorist methods together with the British monarchy in this matter. So therefore there's going to be a lot of heat in this matter among international powers. But I think what you get seeing here when you think about what this means, here we are, we're talking about 9/11. How long has that been? How long has the truth been concealed? And what does it mean that the courts suddenly, or the relevant courts, suddenly declassify the cover that was been given by Bush and by Obama? Everything is sitting there saying some penalty ought to be applied to President Bush, certainly. And more than that, above all, great penalties are obliged to be applied against Obama. The conditions now exist for the instant or rapid ousting of President Obama. That's the first implication and the minimal implication. There are other ones to go on. And this goes to a whole set of legislation which was done under these auspices. And that has to be reviewed too. And a lot of things can change suddenly. And a lot of people, including Wall Street, can find themselves not in comfortable situations as a result of this. Because you're going to get the threat of the rage of the U.S. population when people realize what was done to them and to their nation by the Saudi kingdom, and also, as we know, the British monarchy were in cahoots on this assault on the United States. a murderous assault, a virtual act of war against the United States by the British monarchy and the Saudi monarchy. And that's what the fact of the matter is. And that what all that's necessary is people come up with the right explanation of the facts. And then somebody's going to go down.
Now, as many people may be aware, last week the magazine Politico published an article detailing a meeting that was hosted by Goldman Sachs, which took place at the end of October at the luxurious Conrad Hotel in Lower Manhattan between a few hundred top Wall Street investors and Hillary Clinton. As the article describes, according to people who were there in the room, this room full of self-conceived masters of the universe sat there gazing adoringly at Hillary Clinton as she declared that banker bashing is both unproductive and indeed foolish, which amounts to a direct attack on those who are leading the fight for Glass-Steagall. This fundraiser was merely the latest in a series of speaking engagements that Hillary Clinton has done at similar gatherings of top Wall Street bankers, each of which she is handsomely compensated for with at least $200,000 in speaking fees, if not more. Now, this week, in an interview, Hillary Clinton's remarks were echoed by none other than Valerie Jarrett, who said on Wednesday that there is a, quote, complete alignment between the interests of the Obama administration and the interests of Wall Street. Now, contrast this to when Hillary was running against Obama in 2008 for the presidency, in the midst of the financial crisis, when Hillary announced that she was calling for a 90-day moratorium on foreclosures to keep people in their homes. That this was going to be a central plank of her platform. And of course, this was a direct reflection of the nationwide campaign that you ran for precisely this policy under the name the Homeowners and Bank Protection Act, the HBPA, which had been endorsed by city councils and state legislatures all across the country. And at a campaign rally in New Hampshire that members of the LaRouche PAC attended at that time in 2008, Hillary made very clear that Wall Street hated this policy, that members, bankers on Wall Street had pledged to her that they would crush what she was doing to try to protect the American people. But she declared that no matter how much rage this policy caused on Wall Street, she believed that the welfare of the American people must come first before the interests of the international banks. So the question is, how do you explain the difference between Hillary Clinton then and Hillary Clinton now?
I would say first that she's scared. Plain scared. I don't know what form the scared takes, but she's scared because it was a change in her personality, completely. And, you know, there have been threats against her daughter, threats against other people. I don't know what that, but I know that she went through a process of scares. And when her protector, when she was in the system, left, then she lost her nerve. And then in the course of that process, as the end of her term of office ended, she became more and more scared. And the result is this. Now, also her husband, Bill, has been scared. And I've often believed that they were terrified. They were both terrified. On whose behalf they were terrified, I don't know. But there was enough terror in there coming from the Obama circles to account for all of this. And this is the character of Obama. He's an evil man. He's demonstrated that, there's no question, there's public evidence and so forth. So I think the time has come to leave Obama on the street, if not in a prison.
Now, a question has just come in from Keisha Rogers, who is a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate in the state of Texas. This is what she says. Dear Lynn, as my team and I were out campaigning over the past week, I was noticing a very important pattern of responses in the population. The people we were talking to, in their small businesses and out on the street, already know that it's Wall Street that's behind Obama. Furthermore, they already know that unless you put that up front, that there is no getting rid of what Obama represents as a phenomenon, as a crisis, unless you are getting rid of Wall Street. And that they have no reason to trust anything you're saying if you're not saying that. Because unless you're campaigning to bring down the Wall Street empire itself, you're not serious. And that goes for every candidate running for office or planning to run. Keisha says, and nobody out there is mistaking the fakery and the lies of Obama with the greatness that Kennedy represented in the presidency. Kennedy's challenge to cause people to aspire to greatness still exists in the culture, both in those who were alive when he was alive, but also in those who were born after, though it's not universally recognized to have a vehicle today in anyone associated with the presidency or Congress. By reminding people of how Kennedy thought and what he stood for, and defining that as the only program for today, that this is what has been taken from them, and that this is what they must fight for, I am finding both a sigh of relief and a renewed willingness to actually do something about the crisis they see in Washington coming from Wall Street. Would you please comment, Keisha Rogers, candidate for U.S. Senate, Texas?
Well, I knew this was coming. I wasn't told it was coming, but I knew implicitly it was coming. All right, what's the issue? We're in a situation now where a number of things are happening. So that actually what Hillary's role is and what some of the other things are all coming at the same time. They're converging. But they're different effects, but they're all converging. That's a common feature. What is converging? Two things. First of all, the British Empire, which is part of the Saudi system, because the Saudi system is merely a part of the British Empire. And when 9/11 was run, it was run equally with the responsibility and cupidity of the British monarchy. At the same time, it was done by the Saudis. All right, now what's this lead up to? As a result of this process, which goes from actually the Bush family operation, young Bush, what Bush was involved in with various kinds of people who were steering him. I don't think he had, his brain power, I think, is not particularly great. But nonetheless, he was an awful nuisance, and he was a stooge for a lot of figures who ran him. He ran his operation, including this murder. All right, so the Saudi operation was run against the United States. This is now clear. The court has just decided that this was a crime, and therefore, since it's a crime, they have no right to any kind of claims of protection on this case. And now the thing is now headed toward the direction of, what are we going to do about the criminals? Are we going to do something about them for what they did? Because a lot of Americans died as a result of these murders, which were perpetrated by the leading Saudi agencies. The Saudi monarchy did it. But it wasn't just the Saudi monarchy. The operation was done by the British system and the Saudi system acting together. Now, what the British did, the British supplied the means, and the Saudis provided the action. So they were both accomplices in 9/11. This means that the British monarchy, as an institution, is guilty because it was witting, because the entire funding of the Saudi operation was done with the British and the British system. So therefore, is the Queen going to be sent to prison? She should be, because she was fully witting of all this at this time. She was witting in the same thing that the Saudi royal family was witting. They acted together to organize this crime. This crime required a long funding, a lot of funding. And the British were in it, British official agencies. They funded it. They were used to fund it. So are we going to put the Queen in prison? Why not? She's a criminal. When the court in New York made a ruling on what the interpretation of the events is, not a ruling on what the decision is, the position, but what the definition. This means that the Saudis, the Saudi government, Saudi kingdom is guilty of 9/11. But the 9/11 operation was run under the British monarchy, through their military, the British military system and things related to that. That evidence is all known, already known. So what we're coming to, now we're coming to another point. The British have organized an international fraud, which is actually run in the same way. And this fraud is what has bankrupted the people of the United States. Now you're planning to kill people by removing their medical care, their health care, on the basis of this argument, on the basis of that money is needed for Wall Street. In other words, we're going to benefit Wall Street for its role in arranging the death of Americans. So therefore, Wall Street, the entire Wall Street institution, is now to be put under scrutiny for its complicity in both 9/11, or implications of 9/11, or the benefits of 9/11, such as they are. Now we come to the point that the entire system has gone into a form of what's called bail-in. And bail-in is already being instituted against the people of the United States, already. Bail-in is a crime, a murderous crime, a use of financial means which are murderous, intrinsically murderous. The intention is to accelerate the death rates of older people and sick people. The Obama health care program is a intentionally mass murderous design against citizens, because the rates of the so-called health care service, whatever it's worth, are such that it automatically accelerates the death rate of American citizens, of innocent American citizens. This means that we've got to cancel the Obama policies involved, and the Bush policies as well. It means that the end has come, that obviously at the end of this fiscal year is the crisis point. At that crisis point, either the United States government will continue a process of accelerated mass murder against American citizens in great numbers, fulfilling the Queen's intention to reduce the human population from 7 billion people to 1 billion people. That's her policy. That's the policy of the British monarchy. So that's what we're coming to in January. And Christmas is almost already here. So therefore, the time has come. Either elements of the U.S. government are going to commit mass murder against U.S. citizens en masse, worse than Hitler, or they're not going to do it. If they're not going to do it, they're going to bankrupt Wall Street. Because Wall Street is a key part of this process. And Wall Street, therefore, since Wall Street's funds are mostly swindles, outright swindles, have been swindles all the way through, the time has come. Are we going to throw Wall Street out? Generally, that doesn't mean all of Wall Street, but it means this great gambling system is Wall Street side, and all the crimes that have been committed in the name of this. Now, the time of decision is coming up fast. And whatever Hillary's involved in, her behavior is disgusting. It's simply disgusting. What she's said and what she's said is disgusting. Not only because of what she said and did, but because what she had pretended to be, at least, before then. I think she was a coward. I think she got scared as a coward. That's the only conclusion I would tend to draw at this time. But in the meantime, the fact is, this thing is coming down. Now the question is, what's coming down? Is it going to be the people of the United States are mass murdered because of this program? And Hillary Clinton's action right now tends to contribute to mass murder against Americans. What is she scared? Is the fear of death at the hands of Obama frighten her into this kind of stuff? Just plain cowardice? Corruption or what? But the time has come. The end of this year and the beginning of next year. There is no way to duck that. And what's on the desk right now is the legal system of the United States going to collaborate in genocide against the American people or not? The time is running short. The time to throw Obama out of office quickly and finally, and clean up the mess of the prostitutes of Wall Street is now. That's the issue. The American people are going to find out. Either they're going to save their lives or they're going to ruin Wall Street.
Now, among most members of Congress right now, even the better ones, there is widespread confusion, delusion about what's really going on in the streets of Ukraine. While you have congressmen and senators from both parties making grandiose speeches about the great defenders of democracy and freedom among the EU-loving protesters in Ukraine, the truth of the matter is that much of the leadership of the demonstrations is comprised of explicitly neo-Nazi political parties and right-wing extremists, including most particularly the Svoboda Party, which was founded in 1995 and adopted a logo which was made to resemble a stylized swastika. Senator John McCain, consistent with his track record of being photographed with militant jihadist extremists in Syria, flew to Kiev this week and appeared on stage with the leader of the Svoboda Party, Oli Tyahnybok. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov delivered a press conference stating that there is no doubt that the demonstrations in the streets of Kiev are the product of what he called provocateurs with a long-prepared script. He said, "I am really saddened to see that our Western partners have apparently lost all sense of reality." Now, at the same time, Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych met with his counterpart, Vladimir Putin, and signed a really breakthrough deal in which Russia agreed to extend a $15 billion line of credit to invest into the real economy of Ukraine and to reduce the price of Russian natural gas by 1/3 for the Ukrainian market. In contrast to the EU package that Yanukovych had rejected, which would have required a 40% hike in gas prices, along with a wage freeze and harsh austerity measures. Putin said, "This deal, our deal, the Russian deal, is not tied to any preconditions, nor the increasing or reducing or freezing of any social standards, pensions, allowances, or costs." And in a press conference yesterday, in response to the first question, which was on Ukraine, Putin made very clear what the real economic choices facing Ukraine are. He showed that whereas Ukraine exports to Russia and to the EU are relatively equivalent in monetary terms, when you look in physical terms, this $17 billion monetary export or measurement of the export, in physical terms, they're vastly different. Of the Ukrainian goods that are exported to Russia, $7 billion worth is machinery, machine tools, and manufactured equipment. Of the Ukrainian goods exported to the EU, only $2 billion is comprised of manufactured goods, and the remainder is mostly agricultural goods and produce. So Putin made the point. He said, it's very clear to see that when Russia buys $7 billion worth of machinery and equipment, whereas what Europe is buying is $5 billion worth of agricultural products, and if Ukraine were to adopt the EU commercial standards, they wouldn't be able to sell Russia anything at all anymore. And so Ukraine would immediately have just become merely, in Putin's words, an agricultural appendage of the EU. Now, Lynn, you've been making the point that the truth behind the events in Ukraine indicates even a much more dangerous reality than most people are willing to contemplate. As you've characterized it, we are on the verge of what could be the outbreak of a thermonuclear showdown. And I think that point was also made pretty clearly in an article that was published earlier this week by former Congressman Kucinich, who characterized Ukraine as NATO's Trojan horse on the border of Russia. That under the guise of a so-called economic agreement, which is really just a fairy tale that's crafted to be accepted by the credulous, the real goal here is a dramatic redrawing of the geopolitical map of Central Europe, with Ukraine becoming a new front for advanced placement missile systems right on the doorstep of Russia. So I think it's clear, as you've said, that what's really behind the events in Ukraine, if you understand where the strategy is going, this leads right to thermonuclear war.
Yeah.
Could you comment more on this?
Well, that is it. And the question that's been posed, which is key in this, is crucial. Because the question was, do China and Russia and other nations in that region, do they have a second strike potential in terms and preparation? Huh? Now, the recent indications have been that that potential is established. That means that the initial attack, remember the whole issue of this Ukraine has nothing to do with real politics in the sense other than warfare politics. Because the question was, is Russia capable of a second strike capability or the equivalent? And the answer has been coming out, yes. Also that on the question of China, the questions of China's military reserve capabilities, now struck with this moon landing of China, by China, indicate that the second strike or equivalent capability, functionally equivalent, that is such that the NATO forces could not possibly want to risk a war, a real war, unless the Ukraine had been gobbled up first. And that's what the game has been. Because as long as Ukraine was in the period of jeopardy, that is where Western European jeopardy, the Ukrainians were simply being used as a device to create a possibility of a NATO attack, thermonuclear attack. And it depended on two conditions. First of all, it would not work without Europe grabbing and the United States grabbing Ukraine. If Ukraine, which is a very large area, were to fall into the hands of Western Europe and the United States, then the jeopardy of Asia as a whole would come into being. The second feature is second strike capability. China is highly suspected of having a very significant second strike capability. And particularly at this time, that's significant. However, at the same time, Russia has been acting as if it has a second strike capability in the way it's deploying its entire political and strategic standpoint. So this is what the key is. Now, how is this coming from? Well, you have the entire Western European system is disintegrating. All of Germany is somewhat enhanced, relatively speaking, because it is probably the strongest position in terms of economy, of vital features of economy in Western Europe. But in generally, Spain, Portugal, most of Italy, Greece, and so forth, and now France is collapsing, and other parts. So therefore, Western Europe is on the verge of a general collapse, which is part of a collapse caused by the British Empire in its program for Europe and for the United States. So the United States has been greatly weakened in strategic capabilities by its own policy, not by Russian policy or Chinese policy, but by U.S. policy. We have been, since the assassination of Kennedy, we have been sliding down in physical economy in the United States. The conditions of life of American citizens in general, the fact we don't have a food supply sufficient to meet the needs of our American citizens right now. What people are surviving on in terms of food supply is pretty marginal stuff. And many of our people who are not rich know that. What they were eating today is what they were eating last year and this year are two different things entirely. The food supply in the United States is collapsing. And as a matter of fact, the U.S. government, under recent presidents, has been actually starving our people to death already. There is not enough food supply to meet the needs of the American population now. And the rate of collapse of agricultural production is increasing. So what you're looking at is a real phenomenon which is well known to many of us, but not to a lot of us, but to many of us who don't understand this. The policy has been an old one. It's called the oligarchical system policy. And you find in the history of mankind since, shall we say, what happened in ancient Greece, that this process has been, it's called the oligarchical system. The oligarchical system says that we are not going to maintain a support of a population and the development of that population in terms of technology. What we're going to do is we're going to periodically wipe out whole parts of our own population, that is the lower class population. We're going to wipe them out. We may even exterminate whole citizenry systems. And we'll rebuild again. For example, the Roman Empire. It was Rome itself that destroyed Rome. And what happened is the wealthy Romans took their goods, went north toward the northern Adriatic, and lived in a swamp and became known as Venetians. So that you have periodically in the history of this culture, this happens repeatedly. They would actually wipe out mass exterminations of lower classes of people in order to maintain their ability to control the entire population. This is what's happening. The Queen of England, for example, who, along with her Dutch confederates, is now moving into a policy of reduction of the human population of the planet, to reduce the population from its recent 7 billion people to less than 1. That is already on process. This is something that's happened repeatedly as in oligarchical purges of populations. And this is the oligarchical system. What we really have come to the point of, we have to, if we understand this, if we believe in a free system, that is a system of people who have freedom, are not slaves, are not serfs. If we believe in that kind of system, that means we have to check the oligarchical system. We have to cut its whatever off that's needed to be done. Because we will not, as long as we consent to be subordinated to Wall Street, for example. Anybody who's for Wall Street now is potentially an accomplice of mass murder of Americans. Wall Street is actually a threat to the existence of most Americans right now. It's not just a threat of bad things, it's a threat of murder. Now you take the policy of the Obama policy on health care. The Obama policy on health care and on food supply is a mass murderous policy against the older and other citizens of the United States. That's what's in process. So we come to a point where the showdown is here, a showdown which has occurred repeatedly in past history, where the oligarchical system sets into motion a mass murderers. Now, in the past 3 years or so, 4 years now, the Queen of England has had a policy for the British Empire, not for England, for the British Empire, a policy of mass murder, a reduction of population from 7 billion people on the planet to 1 or less. That's what the policy is. That's the issue here. The oligarchical system, typified by Wall Street, is operating on a basis of a purge of population to reduce the population of the planet rapidly from 7 billion people to 1 or less. That's the policy. This is what's behind the whole story. And the people who don't understand the story are just ignorant or damn fools. This is what it's all about. And now with the end of the year and the significance of the end of the year in terms of financial doings, we're now at the point where either we are going to dump the oligarchical system or we're going to find a mass murder. But the point is, if you drive the world toward this kind of mass murder, which means mass murder intended against China, and that's why they're upset about China and its moon landing and similar kinds of things. Because the moon landing typifies, by China, typifies that Russia and China and other nations have not been cutting down their production that much. What they've been doing is concentrating on destroying the transatlantic region first, because they considered the transatlantic society was a more greater threat to them, opposition to them. So they decided to weaken the United States and the Americas and so forth in Europe. They actually genocide against Spain, against Portugal, against whole parts of Italy, so forth. So genocide is already going on in this area. And the time has come, the intention is to go ahead with this. And that means genocide. And if we don't tolerate the genocide, we resist that. That means that the oligarchical system as we have known it so far, including the British Empire, is finished. And the question then becomes, does the United States, under Obama and other similar scumbags, do they have the ability to launch a thermonuclear war attack on Eurasia, on Russia? Now, the Ukraine issue was that. Because if the Ukraine had gone over to become a part of this European system, then Russia would have been threatened by collapse, by conquest. In that case, then you would find that the rest of Eurasia would be vulnerable. However, if Russia does not collapse, give in, but in fact has a second strike capability of something or equivalent built into its reserves now, then the British Empire and its accomplices are the ones who are in danger. Under these conditions, knowing the oligarchical system, the British Empire, and what its appendages are, and Americans who are like Wall Street types, are actually a threat to the human species. And if we don't deal with that, they will use whatever means they have, destructive means, weaponry, thermonuclear capabilities, all kinds of weapons, will be used to cause a massive destruction of life, of human life. And our responsibility now, we're coming to the break point, which is the new year. That's the official point where this thing comes into showdown. And Hillary's on the wrong side of the vote on that one. She's on the mass killer side. She may not know it, but she is. So that's what the issue is. We've come to the point, we've all been living through this trend, and what you have is you have dumb Americans. What are dumb Americans? They're ones that don't pay any attention to reality. They say, no, that could never happen. Yeah? Typical dumb American. No, you're wrong. That could never happen. They would never do that. They would never do that. You're wrong. No, you're crazy. Nobody believes you. Right? That's your typical dumb American, or stupid American if you prefer the term. But that's what the issue is. And so we've come to a point, not to some kind of a little issue, not to some market collapse or some foolish little entertainment of that sort. What we're doing is we're talking about the possible extinction of the human species, because you're on the edge, knowing what the oligarchy is. They will risk everything not to be beaten. And that means a threat of extermination of the human species. And therefore, we better get on the horse now and prevent that from happening. I think the first thing would be to invite President Obama to leave office immediately.
It's a very inviting proposal. Well, I'd like to ask about like to bring up something that's today it almost seems like a foreign melody, but it's one whose composition originated here, which is space. In particular, I'd like to ask you about China's recent landing on the moon. You contrast this with the United States, where Some are proposing putting conventional warheads on ICBM delivery systems, which is about the worst possible thing you could imagine ever doing. And China has used a rocket to successfully soft land a rover on the moon. This makes China the third nation to have done this. And the first two of those nations, the United States and the Soviet Union, haven't done so in 4 decades. So this rover that China has launched and landed, it's in the context of a much broader perspective overall. The Chinese rover, U-2, which means Jade Rabbit, has ground-penetrating radar, which is capable of analyzing the structure of the crust down to a depth of 100 meters. The delivery system is capable of sending payloads 10 times larger than that which was just landed on the moon, which bears obvious importance for whatever future missions they might be thinking about. And the father of the Chinese lunar program, Ouyang Ziyuan, my apologies to my pronunciation, he's long been focusing on the resource potential on the moon, emphasizing the availability of structural materials such as iron, which would be used for construction on the moon, not to bring back to Earth, and also the very special potential fusion fuel, which is very rare on Earth but quite abundant on the moon, helium-3. This landing has also caught the attention of experts in the United States. Recently, the former Apollo 17 astronaut, geologist, and leading advocate for lunar development, Jack Schmidt, he said that China has made no secret in their interest in helium-3 on the moon. Also, Paul Sputus, a leading planetary geology and remote sensing expert at the Lunar and Planetary Institute in Houston, highlighted the significance of China's landing and spoke about the prospects of developing water resources on the moon. He said, "Clearly, they have got other payloads in the queue, waiting to be sent there. Just what? We shall have to wait and see." So, Lynn, you've been emphasizing the moon as a staging ground for other developments, as a base of expanding operations for contributing to mankind's role and our presence in controlling the inner solar system. The close proximity of the moon makes it easy to access, easy to control things remotely, and the potential for resource use on the moon, in situ resource use, means that a great deal of development could be performed on the moon itself. Also, with its lower gravity, this might make things much easier. In the context of this is your discussion of the defense of the Earth from our unfriendly neighbors, at least presently unfriendly neighbors, those asteroids which one day, if unchecked, will destroy life on this planet, that our development of the moon is a major stepping part in developing this increased power. Now, what I'd like to ask you about is if you could say more for our viewing audience about how this contributes to ending the oligarchical system. Your new paper, The Science of the Human Mind, you write that this perspective of solar system development, that this is the prospect for ending the reign of the oligarchical system and a new basis for relations among sovereign nations. You say that the development of the powers of the human mind must become the universal law for mankind. Could you say more?
Yeah. Well, there's a certain amount of history involved in this, but the more hardcore of the history, of my history in this effect, is I became associated with a number of scientists who formed the Fusion Energy Foundation back in the 1970s. And this came on the heels of some of my rampages against Wall Street and so forth at that time. But there were certain capabilities which I already had. And these were the capabilities which I either had or were given to me in the late 1970s and early 1980s by people who saw that I was capable of organizing something which became known as a strategic defense analysis system. And so that was the first thing. And then when we got into that process, then there were certain elements from the old OSS system and those circles who were still a key part of the reserves, of the intelligence reserves of the United States. And so with them and with the president, we went with the SDI. Now the SDI was perfectly designed. It was ready to work. And so I had done my part in getting involved in this, and I began to pick up a lot of cooperation about from 1790, 80, 90, so forth. A whole group of people began piling on with me and saying, okay, let's go together, let's do this stuff. And first of all, they gave me a probing thing. Was I qualified to do what I was going to do? And they decided that I was qualified to do what I was going to do. And so they piled in the resources around the election of the new president, and that worked. The problem was that the British interests with European interests piled on and said, no, you're not going to do that. And so they went to first of all, get rid of the president, put him out of action, and get a Bush, an actual Vice President Bush was taking over a lot of this stuff. And then they decided in the middle of the 1980 to get rid of me. So they just cooked up a fraud and framed me up with all kinds of things, nonsense. It didn't work at first. They had a big trouble trying to crush me. And I kept going until the end of the 1980s, when I was actually jugged. It was on a complete frame-up. There was no truth to any of it. But the Bush administration at that time, Vice President Bush, who was then continued as President Bush in the following term, they were out to get rid of me in any way. And I was saved because a number of people realized that I was significant and didn't want me to be lost. They wanted me available. And so I became available again and did other things. But that's the general background of what my role in this thing has been. But now what we've done, I picked up again more people after I got out of the jug, and began doing more of the same kind of thing of planning. And this began to pay off. We began to get some successful developments, and it led to, I had a fairly successful operation there for a while. So I was in the situation to take this on. And that's the essential core of the story. This is not some strange thing that I was not a mystery. I was well known. I had made a lot of enemies from Wall Street types and so forth. I was also a very particular enemy of Wall Street types. And I had problems as a result of that, real operations from the FBI under that old regime. They did everything possible to harass the hell out of me. But I stuck to it, and I emerged in the 1970 where I was right and everybody in Wall Street was wrong in terms of economics. So when 1971, after the summer of 71, I had a clear road, and so I began to rebuild my whole career on that basis. And so I came to that point. So that's what happened with actually forming this process. It was a convergence of various elements, including people from the former OSS and so forth, leading figures at that time, and key people in Germany, major people in the German system, key major forces, military and others in France, leading figures in Italy and elsewhere. And we also had a sort of a deal in trying to deal with the Russian problem. And Russia was going to cooperate with the SDI, and so then they got a new maximum leader who was British agent. And so therefore they turned suddenly against us. So we had gone into a situation where we had the leadership of the Soviet Union at that time, in that interim period. And they were going to cooperate because they saw that as a way of dealing with the whole problem. End this war threat. Let's get out of this war business. And let's reassort ourselves. And that would have worked. But the way it was done, the worst thing was possible. And they got me out of the situation in that process. But that's what it is, and it's still that today. That's what I know, that's what I do, that's what I understand. that's my history, that's my skill. I'm much older now, less frisky than I used to be, but I still know the business. And that's what this whole story leads up to. That what I'm laid out is perfectly feasible. I've never actually made, in my later life, I've never made really foolish moves. I've often been treated as if I were a fool, but I was not. And I've had a number of successes. And the enemy knows that. They keep getting me pushed down under, and then I bounce back. And I tend to do that, even at this age. So now I have these skills, and that's what I operate on. And that's what it is. And now I have an association I work with, and that association has its own skills. And we bring people together around those skills, and we find that in a world which is pretty much a stupid world, because intelligent people have become more and more scarce in this business. The younger generation for our young people, and their teenagers, the 20s, are generally pretty stupid. You have, for example, most of the people under the Obama administration and the Bush administration before then, they're just not intelligent people. They really aren't. They have very little training. Under the Obama administration and the Bush administration, but especially the Obama administration, the population is absolutely incompetent. They're technically incompetent. They couldn't do anything. And if we're going to rebuild the United States, we're going to have cooperation from Asia. We shipped our automobile industry outside the United States. We don't have an automobile industry anymore. We don't have those kinds of skills anymore. We don't have that kind of labor force anymore. We lost it. We lost it especially after Clinton left office. From the time that Bill Clinton left office, the United States has been going to hell in terms of its economy. And the rate of going to hell has been an accelerating one. And now the only solution we have is to get rid of this threat that I've mentioned here tonight on a couple of aspects of this thing, and to kick Obama out of office and kick the whole bunch of swindlers, the Wall Street swindlers, get them out of there. And then we can buy new contracts with Europeans and with Asia, and with East Asia, and by going to thermonuclear fusion, which is available technique. It may take us, 10 to 12 years before we get a thermonuclear fusion program going, but we will be in the process of doing it, and that's the important thing. You don't get a new technology just by one flop. You start with a commitment to do it. You get your technology organized and do it. And while you're on the process of going, say, a 12-year program of developing thermonuclear fusion as a capability, and we cooperation with the Trans-Pacific region of the world, we can rebuild a shattered, almost destroyed United States. It will take us a dozen years. I won't live that long. But what I am committed to is to starting the process which will live when I won't. And that's my job. And there are aspects of this where I'm not so good anymore. But there are other aspects I am still good at. And that's what I'm going to work on.
I want to conclude the webcast on that note. So thank you very, very much, Lynn, and thanks, Jason, for joining us today. Thank you for tuning in tonight, and please stay tuned to LaRouchePAC.com. That brings a conclusion to our broadcast tonight. Good night.